What criminal committed an almost perfect crime, and what was the thing that messed it up? The guy who created the Silk Road gave himself away by initially introducing the Silk Road to the world from an email address that would ultimately lead investigators right to him. I think logging into his laptop in public place was his mistake, because even if he would have gotten caught, there was no way, at least very hard, to put him behind bars without he logging into his laptop and giving it to investigators. Yeah, he got caught because he used the Wi-Fi at a local library. A male and female FBI agent pretended to be a married couple having an intense argument. When he looked up from his laptop at them, the man tackled him and the woman grabbed the laptop before he could shut it. That one dude who robbed a bank by hiring a bunch of people from Craigslist to show up wearing the same outfit he was and wait outside, he would have gotten away, but a homeless man saw him do a practice run the day before and after the robbery told the police. DB Tuber was the name the press gave him as he escaped on an inner tube down a creek. Anthony Curcio is his name, and he wrote a book that was very interesting. He planned his robbery for months. He planned to use pepper spray to subdue one of the guards, and to convince himself it would work, he pepper sprayed himself. He also moved boulders out of the creek for months before to make sure his escape path was clear. Edit: he robbed an armored car, not a bank. His book is called Heist and High. Loeb and Leopold. Two high IQ teenagers in Chicago in the 1920s committed a murder just because they thought they were too clever to be caught. One of them lost his glasses where they dropped the body. Very rare prescription that led the police right to them. Also didn't help that the two wouldn't stop talking about how they got away with the killing. The Antwerp Diamond Heist, the perfect heist of the century, where an Italian gang stole 100 million in gems. While leaving Antwerp, they disposed of the disguises and the tools used, but one member of the gang was too lazy to burn everything as instructed. Among the rubbish, the police found envelopes of the Antwerp Diamond Center and a receipt for a sandwich bought at a store close to the center. They recovered video footage of the sandwich store and busted the mastermind of the heist, who didn't give up his mates, but some were later identified. Some of the stolen diamonds are still unaccounted for. Wolfgang Beltracchi, he made millions with forged paintings he painted all himself. He was ultimately caught because he once accidentally used paint that contained a very slight amount of a substance that wasn't used in the days of the original painter. I get that selling priceless artwork would be a highly coveted goal, but if you can recreate an exact copy so well that it takes a chemical test on the paint itself to notice the difference? Is there not a creative bone in his entire body? He didn't copy paintings, he imitated the artist's style and created original lost paintings. The Dunbar Armored Robbery, the largest cash heist in U.S. history. A 6-man inside job to rob an armored cash depot. They set up a house party as an alibi, used the keys to get into the cafeteria, and waited in there until all employees came in on break, then ambushed and subdued them without firing a shot or raising an alarm. They then loaded the money bags with over $18 million into a U-Haul, destroyed the CCTV tapes and returned to the party. Then they sat on the money for 6 months before hiring a crooked lawyer to set up a real estate money laundering scheme to avoid suspicion. 2 years after the robbery, one of the men paid a real estate broker with a stack of money still wrapped in the original currency strap. The broker immediately reported it to the police. After being arrested, he cracked under interrogation, confessed to the robbery, and ratted out his partner's edit. All the men have since finished their prison sentences, and most of the money was never found, so there's a chance they still won in the end. That's an incredibly stupid way to get caught. It is, but it's also not that surprising. Most of us do really stupid things at least occasionally. These 6 guys would have had to make it their entire lives without any one of them doing anything really stupid. The real answer is that there are many perfect crimes, in the sense that no one is ever arrested for having committed them. In 1969, Ted Conrad walked out of a bank in Cleveland with $215,000 in cash, equivalent to $1,700,000 in 2021, and was never caught. He lived his life as a free person in Boston before confessing to his family just before he died. His daughter told the news after he passed, and she leveraged it for news coverage and income for her dad's story. She even mentioned some stuff about how it was always weird how phobic her dad was of flying and leaving the country. One time her mother and her wanted to go to Paris or somewhere in Europe, and he opted for them to go without him altogether. There's a podcast series about this, and his daughter is essentially a co-host of it. She tells the story about how he told the family near the end of his life. You need to watch/read about the serial killer BTK. How he got caught with stupidity and lack of understanding of technology. For those not interested in looking it up, BTK had a history of communicating with the police by writing letters. In 2005, he asked the police if a floppy disk could be traced at all. Cops of course said no. So BTK sent a floppy disk with his writings, and police found metadata from a deleted Word file from his church that was last edited by Dennis. Edit to add more context. Rader's killings happened between circa 1974 to 1991. So he evaded capture for decades before sending his floppy disk in. More to it than that. Rader assumed the cop liked playing cat and mouse with him, so the cop would never lie. Naive, yes, but hardly stupid. Rader to me is the scariest kind of predator. I recently learned some dogs are born bad. Like the wiring in their head leads to nothing but aggression, hostility, whatever. I think dogs aren't unique in this regard. I think prison is filled with people that were nature over nurture bad. Rader is one of these, just a walking talking ball of fucked up wiring. That Australian kid who hacked the FBI and put his photos on their website. He scrubbed the metadata from the photo so it wouldn't show the GPS location, then he accidentally uploaded the original with that information still on it. That crime kinda sounds like it should barely be a crime, or at least turn into a job offer. Assuming he only hacked the site to prove he could, and wasn't trying to get in the way of FBI investigations, I'm guessing a kid who could hack their site shows great promise. Though being Australian he couldn't actually work for them. Harold Shipman, seemingly a normal general practitioner, turns out to be a prolific serial killer with maybe up to 250 victims over his career. Only discovered when a hospital worker was concerned about the number of cremation forms they had to process for his elderly patients, so very close to going undetected. I thought it was because he was changing their wills to make him the beneficiary and a relative cottoned on? You're both right, a doctor became suspicious in the number of cremation certificates, but police were unable to find sufficient evidence. After the investigation closed, Shipman killed 3 more people. The final nail in the coffin, so to speak, is what you are speaking of, where he tried to make himself the sole beneficiary of a former mayor. So, it was the will manipulation that got him caught, but he was under suspicion beforehand with the cremation certificates. Salim Kara, who single-handedly stole 2.3 million in coins, one by one. He used a modified car antenna with a magnet to extract coins from the deposit slots after his maintenance rounds at the rail ticket machines. He kept a low profile for 13 years, but blew it by buying a $1 million house in the early 90s. A guy in my town did a similar thing while working for the council. It was his job to empty the money from parking meters, and he stole a huge chunk of it over about 10 years. Finally he was forced to take long service leave, which he tried hard not to do. That's when he should have fled the country to Mallorca or something, because when someone else started doing his job they saw a huge uptick in takings. Maybe not as movie-like as some of the ones in this thread, but someone robbed a bank a few minutes from my house and fled on a bicycle. He was in and out quickly enough that cops weren't on the scene until he had ditched the bike in the neighborhood. He had concealed his identity enough during the robbery that all the police had to go on is a male riding a bicycle carrying a parcel in the vicinity of this neighborhood. He had made it to a truck he had parked in the neighborhood without being noticed by anyone. The police had little idea what to look for, and by all measure he had made the perfect getaway. All he had to do was drive home. While attempting to leave the neighborhood in his truck he saw a police vehicle making a patrol, and in a panic he drove his truck straight into a utility pole. The patrolling officer saw this, went to check on him, and found the stolen money in his truck. Omaha? Florida. I knew a guy who got into selling drugs on the dark web. He had this setup where he'd buy the drugs and package them in his room, ship them through USPS, and collect money through cryptocurrency. He made a lot of money, went on for a while without being caught. They even found fictionalized accounts he wrote about how he was able to do this, including driving 50 miles to make drops. He was caught when an employee noticed he was handling large numbers of small envelopes while wearing latex gloves and reported it. He probably would have gotten away with it if he'd worn winter gloves over the latex. There was this guy in Germany called Shiny Flakes, who sold drugs through the normal internet, not the darknet. He packed and sent them out from his bedroom while living with his mother, and stepfather I think. He even got his drugs tested to make sure that they are of good quality. He sent the drugs out via mail and only got caught because people used fake names to order and then couldn't pick up their orders from the post office. After he got released from prison he got involved in some criminal activity again. The police still can't freeze his funds since he was paid in Bitcoin while running the site. Willie Sutton was one of the greatest bank robbers and never hurt anyone. He was caught when his car broke down and he bought a sandwich and was recognized. The guy who recognized him went on the news and talked about it. Someone killed him for it and they never solved the case. The guy that recognized him and called the police, Schuster, I think, had a hit put out on him by a mob boss because Sutton was respected/beloved in the underworld. The Friday night bank robber was the most prolific bank robber in US history. I believe he had a master's degree in something analytical like math. Was a martial arts instructor. He figured out there's a time of the year in the Northeast where it would be dark out just before the banks closed. He used motorcycles to drive through the woods to these banks and rode it back through the woods to a U-Haul truck he had waiting and would put the bike into the truck and drive away calmly. He did this for a long time, kind of like the robbers in the movie Point Break. He would stop for the rest of the year, which had the police really guessing. They couldn't figure out patterns for a long time. Years later the police started to catch on with his idea of doing it on Friday nights in the Northeast, and from video knew he was probably into martial arts. But that doesn't exactly narrow it down. Dumb luck, some random kid stumbled upon his buried cache of things like a gun, gloves, mask, cash, etc. in the woods. They turned it over to the cops and that's how they ended up finding out who he was. The FBI gave him some deal where he worked with them and banks on telling them how to prevent bank robberies. Israel Keyes is almost certainly the smartest serial killer that has been caught. He studied past serial killers and how they were caught and so on. Keyes targeted random people across the US, focusing on campgrounds and isolated locations to avoid detection. He preferred strangulation over guns and planned his murders months in advance. To remain undetected, the dude turned off his phone, paid with everything with cash. For the Courier murders, he flew to Chicago, drove 1,000 miles down to Vermont, and used a murder kit he had hidden 2 years earlier. He was only caught because he kidnapped a girl and tried to get ransom money from her parents, and law enforcement tracked him down via withdrawals from her bank account and the car he was seen abducting her in on security cameras. The FBI does not even know how many people he killed, so who knows how long he could have kept it up if he had chosen to continue his usual killings. The scariest part about these stories is you don't know who the best serial killers are. You see so many people who got caught over something stupid, which tells me that there are many people who didn't do something stupid to get themselves caught. I worked in the federal prison system. Met a man in his mid-30s who was serving time for a series of bank robberies. His arrest was a complete surprise in his area. Model citizen. Married, young kids. Volunteered and gave generously to his kids' school. His bank robberies were intricately planned and well-timed. One of his underlings decided to open up his own bank robbing business. He wasn't as smart and ratted out our man when he was caught, as part of his plea deal. Reminds me of my relative and his moonshine business. Proceeds went to both his household and the community, including the trunk of local sheriff deputies. Lol, I've heard of others selling drugs or moonshine while donating to the community. Charles Schmidt. He murdered a teen girl for fun and got away with it, so he murdered some more. He murdered this teen girl and her little sister, who was only 13. He enlisted his best friend, I can't remember his name, to help him bury the bodies. I think they were buried for about 2 weeks before his friend cracked and told the police on him. I think Charles would have been caught sooner or later anyways. He was on his way to becoming a serial killer. Brian Regan. He worked for the US government and had a top secret security clearance and stole massive amounts of highly classified documents. He was dyslexic and couldn't spell correctly. His poor spelling led the FBI right to him, and he was caught trying to sell secrets to other nations. There's a book about him called The Spy Who Couldn't Spell. 10 out of 10, a must read if you like crime stuff. His poor spelling led. Nice. The irony is spot on. Robert Durst. He was caught while being interviewed for an HBO series, to which he initially agreed on to clear his name. Went to bathroom and mumbled to microphone, which he thought was off, "What the hell did I do? Kill all of them, of course." This was later presented to the court as evidence. You can still watch it on HBO. The Oklahoma City Bombing Museum is fascinating and talks about how they were at a dead end essentially, but Timothy McVeigh screwed up just one time and used his real name instead of alias when ordering Chinese food one night and left the receipt in the hotel room, where they were able to see a mismatch between the ordered name and hotel reservation name. McVeigh was in custody at that point. He was arrested within hours of the bombing, driving a car with no plates, and admitted to having an illegal concealed handgun. If he had not been arrested for that, he would have disappeared to the wilderness, not unlike Eric Rudolph. There's the story of Daniel Rigmaiden. He was a scam artist who defrauded the government out of hundreds of thousands in tax money. He was eventually caught, but was so confident that his methods of avoiding capture were thorough that he thought law enforcement had to have been cheating in some way, abusing power. When caught, he turned whistleblower. This kid was smart. Per documentary IMDb, he evades the FBI for months. Once captured, he uses his time, then in prison, to investigate. His obsessive search for the truth leads to a groundbreaking discovery. Law enforcement used a secret technology called a stingray to intercept his phone calls and personal information, as well as those of millions of unsuspecting Americans. He takes his discovery public, and the revelation not only carries implications for his case, but also for the fate of the Fourth Amendment. The stingrays are cell site simulators or IMSI catchers, invasive cell phone surveillance devices that mimic cell phone towers and send out signals to trick cell phones in the area into transmitting their locations and identifying information. When used to track a suspect's cell phone, they also gather information about the phones of countless bystanders who happen to be nearby, as a law enforcement can literally drive down any block with one turned on, having it connect to every single mobile device as it moves down the street. Mobile cell towers, essentially gathering your information without your knowledge. Tracy Frame. She murdered her live-in boyfriend by shooting him in his sleep, wrapping his body up in an electric blanket and tarp, and drove a bit out of the way to dump his body in a drain pipe. Couldn't fit him, so she left him on the side of the road, dumped gasoline over him, and set him on fire. He had to be identified with dental records. Police suspected her, but they had no evidence until employees from a janitorial supply company told police and said a woman matching her description came in asking how to get blood stains out of carpet. They told her to try a specific kind of acid. So, she goes to a store to buy the acid, and the cameras see a woman purchasing on the day of the murder, but the quality of the footage was shitty, so it could be Tracy or it could be any random white woman with brown hair in the suburbs. The only way they were able to confirm it was Tracy was because she had used her loyalty rewards card on the purchase of the acid to save like 13 cents. Al Capone was doing all the crimes. And it's the tax evasion that got him. In his case, it's not like he was some elusive mastermind, staying one step ahead of the police. Local law enforcement knew perfectly well who he was and what he was doing. Capone just had enough of them in his pocket that they wouldn't do anything about it. The tax stuff was just an excuse for the feds, who he had no influence over, to get involved, and then they threw the book at him for it as a proxy for the consequences they couldn't exact on him for all the other stuff. So they were at least able to get him off the street even if they couldn't charge him directly for the things that made him a high priority. John Haig committed a series of murders in the 1940s and disposed of the bodies in vats of acid. The police knew he was guilty but couldn't prove it. The smug bastard even laid out a full confession but couldn't be prosecuted as there were no remains recovered, until one of the bodies failed to dissolve completely and was able to be identified by the pathologist. If he's kept his mouth shut and stopped killing after the first round of questioning, he'd probably have gotten away with it. Reminds me of Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman killer. He froze the body of his victim to screw with the estimated time of death, then dumped it 15 months after the killings. He didn't thaw it though, and the medical examiner found ice in the corpse and realized the trick he had attempted. The Indiana fertility specialist who was using his own juice to fertilize the eggs of his patients in the 1980s. He was part of the Quiverful cult and fathered a confirmed 94 children in his home area, but it's estimated there could be over 200 half-siblings. He was found out decades later when one of his patients' children took a DNA test and found 7 half-siblings matches. He absolutely would have gotten away with it, if it weren't for those meddling kids. Guy Fawkes. Man wanted to boom British Parliament House during a party/celebration, to maximize targets. For this plot, he included somebody who had a relative attending the party. This man told his relative, "Yo fam, we gonna blow this shit sky high. Don't come to school." This led to authorities foiling the plot. You got some bits right there. Guy Fawkes wasn't actually the mastermind, that was a man named Robert Catesby, and the target was the king. Catesby, Fawkes, and everyone else involved in the plot were Catholic, and at the time they were being pretty heavily persecuted. The plan was to assassinate the king in order to try to put a Catholic on the throne. Guy Fawkes was brought in as the explosives expert to plant as much gunpowder as he needed in the undercroft of Parliament, and set it to blow while the king was directly above during the state opening. Then, as you say, one of the people in the plot wrote to Lord Monagle telling him to don't come to school. He showed it to a bunch of people, the king found out, and when the authorities searched Parliament they found Fawkes busy stacking up barrels full of gunpowder. In 1995, Mark Winger of Springfield, Illinois, wanted to kill his wife Donna, if I recall correctly, so he could carry on an affair, and the perfect scenario came. A week before her death, Roger Harrington was her shuttle driver on the way home from the St. Louis airport, and he reportedly spoke about always getting high and having orgies. In turn, the wingers complained to the shuttle company. Then, Mark calls the police claiming that he shot Roger after he caught him attacking Donna. Despite the contradiction of Roger being shot in a way that Mark did not claim happened, the case was shut, and Mark was viewed as a hero for killing the man who killed his wife. However, in his infinite wisdom, Mark wouldn't stop asking the police about the case, despite it being ruled as closed. Also, he tried to sue the shuttle company for Roger's alleged action, to which the company started their own investigation which showed that the events couldn't have gone the way Mark described. The final nail came when his affair partner came forward to the police and described their affair, which led to further re-examination of evidence that showed it was staged. Mark was later tried and convicted in 2002 and sentenced to life without parole. In another dirt moment for Mark, he was later given an extra 35 years for trying to solicit the murder of his affair partner and his rich friend who refused to bail him out from behind bars. The main piece of evidence being a 19-page handwritten plan for how he wanted the murders to be carried out. I work in downtown Chicago. Last year, one guy robbed the Fifth Third Bank across the street. He escaped into the Ogilvy Transportation Center and disappeared into the night despite it being so crowded and busy. Got away with the money and everything. Until 3 weeks later, when a woman recognized him as having flirted with her right before he robbed the bank and had given her his phone number. She handed that over to the authorities and he was successfully caught. Bro was so close to getting away with it. The Unabomber was the target of what is still the most expensive criminal investigation of all time, and they still had absolutely nothing on him. They were looking in the wrong part of the country, for a totally different profile of person, and the few leads they were actually working on were red herrings. He got his manifesto published, and used the phrase "eat your cake and still have it" rather than the more commonly known version. His brother David just so happened to read that manifesto and remember how Ted used that phrase. David decides, on a lark, to go through some of the stuff Ted had left at their mom's house and finds an early draft of the manifesto. David, after much soul-searching, decides to report this to the FBI and they almost throw the lead out before deciding to actually investigate it. Anything at all in that chain doesn't happen. Ted uses a different phrase, David doesn't read the manifesto or doesn't bother investigating Ted's old stuff, or Ted doesn't leave the draft in mom's house, or David doesn't tell the FBI, or the FBI toss the lead entirely, and the Unabomber probably stays active to this day. It wasn't Dave, but his wife, who had never met Ted. She recognized the way he wrote by the letters Ted had sent to Dave berating him for getting married if I recall correctly. Truly, Ted Kaczynski must have been the most annoying man on the planet for her to recognize him without having ever talked to him. I felt for his brother. You know, he was battling it for a while before it was just too damn obvious to ignore. Absolutely, there's no way after reading his manifesto he didn't know it was Ted. To be fair, I actually kind of felt for Ted. The CIA used him as a prime contributor to MKUltra while he was enrolled at Harvard. Many people who were close to him or family said that those experiments changed him. Now I don't mean that in a way he was justified, however who is to say he would have gone to those lengths if he was never experimented on.